act to run in the halls of Congress. How should we view the president-elect's insistence that Matt Gaetz needs to be his attorney general? And why does he really want Matt Gaetz to be his AG so much?
Well, look, I think he's going to push hard until and unless he views the fact that he's pushing up against a wall. And that's certainly not the case right now, with Republican senators at least willing to listen to his entreaties. I don't think we should be surprised by the Matt Gaetz selection. This is everything Donald Trump said he would do over and over again on the campaign trail, that he wanted to go after an agency which he views as corrupt and politicized and having lost touch with its role. Gaetz is kind of the avatar of the most aggressive MAGA stance towards the Department of Justice. And so I think Trump is basically taking a big cut here, a big swing at trying to do everything he wants to do at DOJ with a firebrand at the helm. I don't see him backing off anytime soon unless the kind of information ecosystem around Gaetz changes in a substantial way. And there's no sign of that just yet.
And I wonder, as you think about this push for Gaetz, is there really a sense maybe in the transition team that if they can get Gaetz through, if they can get that most controversial, hardest nominee through, that they can basically get anyone through?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, obviously, all of these nominees, once they become nominees, will be dealt with individually, and they'll each have to go through different committees that could have kind of different dynamics overall. But the same general rule is going to apply here. To sink any one of these nominees, you would either need 4 no votes on the floor, which I think is exceptionally difficult, or a behind-the-scenes wave that would indicate massive opposition leading up to a floor vote. I think, if they get Gaetz across, it would certainly prove that anything is possible. But the thing I'm watching out for is whether the opposition to him sort of solidifies and builds in a meaningful way that we never even get it to the floor. And I think that would show the Senate pushing back against Trump in a meaningful way that, again, we've seen no sign of them doing as I stand here right now in mid to late November.
Yeah, and we're looking at live pictures right now of President-elect Donald Trump standing next to Elon Musk. They're in Texas ahead of the SpaceX launch that's scheduled for later in the next hour. So that's him meeting with people who are going to be super influential in, it seems, the second Trump administration. So interesting to see them there gathered.
And Yamiche, can I just flag, standing over Elon Musk's shoulder there is Kevin Cramer, the senator from North Dakota, who just a few days ago was expressing skepticism about Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. He did it in interviews with me and with other reporters here on the Hill. It was reported overnight and confirmed by NBC that he was on the phone with Donald Trump yesterday about this, Trump calling him to talk about Gaetz. Now the two are appearing side by side. I think it's fair to assume this is part of that kind of personal lobbying effort from Donald Trump continuing now in South Texas.
And it's interesting, as we're seeing the sort of wider view of this. You see Senator Ted Cruz there, too. I wonder, yesterday in an interview with Fox News, Trump said he wasn't out for retribution, but does it feel like maybe he can outsource that to maybe some of the people who are going to be standing around him, even here in Texas, as he's waiting for this SpaceX launch? I wonder if this is sort of like, I'm not going to do this, but maybe the people standing around me, they're going to get that retribution for me.
I think that's certainly possible, although, to hear Donald Trump tell it, his view of the Justice Department, there's no separation between the White House and the DOJ like we've gotten used to in the post-Nixon, post-Watergate era. I have a hard time imagining that if Trump does decide to go kind of aggressively after his perceived enemies, that he would bother to try to kind of hide his fingerprints from that effort. That's just not typically been the way he operates.
Yeah. And again, as we're looking at these live pictures with the 45-47 hat on, we just learned moments ago that Dr. Oz is President-elect's pick for the head of Medicare and Medicaid. And today, Trump tapped transition co-chair Howard Lutnick for Commerce Secretary. What does that mean, you think, for Trump's search for Treasury Secretary, which was another role that Lutnick was looking for or was being looked at and considered for?
Yeah, it's clearly stalled to some degree. I mean, I had a source a week ago Friday who was telling me that they thought they were very close to making a decision for that pick. And now more than a week has passed without either a pick or an announcement of any kind on Treasury. We saw Elon Musk pitching Howard Lutnick for that job, I think as recently as yesterday or certainly over the weekend. And so some of this has moved pretty quickly. But, I mean, Trump is going to centralize a lot of the economic decision making in the White House. He has very particular views about things like tariffs. And so, who he picks for these economic jobs will be responsible for the cleanup or for the salesmanship on the Hill or to foreign leaders. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to tariffs, which are, again, Trump's favorite economic tool, he'll be the person driving the bus on all of those things, no matter who he picks to be the Commerce Secretary or ultimately the Treasury Secretary.
Yeah. Well, some great reporting as always. Thank you so much, Garrett Haake. And as we continue to see these live pictures of President-elect Donald Trump there in Texas waiting for the SpaceX launch, I want to come to you, Ryan. As we mentioned, NBC News has confirmed that testimony from a woman involved in an investigation into Matt Gaetz and those allegations has been hacked. That there might be materials from that investigation that hacker got their hands on. So what more do we know about that?
Well, that this is information that tracks very closely to the information that we have heard that was released in many of the reporting around the accusations against Matt Gaetz. And of course, what the attorney for some of these witnesses has come forward and said that they've testified to the House Ethics Committee and to the Department of Justice. There could be more detail within these transcribed interviews, the transcripts of these interviews that would be of use, particularly to the members of the Senate that may have the opportunity to vote on Matt Gaetz' confirmation. The question is, will they come to the light of day, and will senators feel comfortable using material that could have been hacked? I think what senators would prefer to have is that information transferred from the House to the Senate so that they can make it a formal part of their investigation. But what we can tell you, Yamiche, is that senators are very interested in learning everything they possibly can about every investigation into Matt Gaetz before they make the final decision as to whether or not they're going to vote yes or no on his confirmation as Attorney General.
Well, as you just said, they want this information. How crucial do you think this information is going to be when it comes to specifically Republican senators considering whether or not they confirm Matt Gaetz there?
I almost feel as though most of these senators have probably made up their minds one way or another how they're going to vote, but you would have to use or view the information from the ethics report as a reason for them to say no. That it is even more alarming and more shocking than the information that already exists, so that they could go to Donald Trump, who's pressing on them very directly, saying, you've got to vote for my guy, and say, I can't vote for your guy when this is out there. And so I think that's part of the reason why you see an effort to prevent this information from coming to the light of day. And I think it's also part of the reason that there's such a vigorous back and forth between the House and Senate about bringing this information out. The folks associated with Gaetz himself would say that this is information that the Department of Justice has had for quite some time, and they chose not to prosecute him as a result of it. They didn't necessarily clear him. Doesn't necessarily mean the information is true or false, but what it means is that they looked at it and decided it wasn't a prosecutable offense. Now, that's much different than the standard that you might hold for someone who wants to be the Attorney General, but that's part of the deliberations here back and forth between senators and the House Ethics Committee.
Well, definitely all eyes are going to be on Capitol Hill as this continues to be an issue we're following. So thank you so much, Ryan. We're also following Trump-related developments out of Manhattan, where the judge presiding over Donald Trump's hush money case could decide at any moment now how to proceed with sentencing. It comes as prosecutors now say that sentencing in that case can be postponed. In a filing today, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and his team urged the judge not to dismiss the case, as Mr. Trump's lawyers have requested, but acknowledge the difficulties of sentencing a sitting president, or, of course, in Trump's case, president-elect. That filing says, quote, the people deeply respect the office of the president, are mindful of the demands and obligations of the presidency, and acknowledge that defendant's inauguration will raise unprecedented legal questions. We also deeply respect the fundamental role of the jury in our constitutional system. I'm joined now by Jeremy Saland, a criminal defense attorney and former assistant district attorney in Manhattan. So thank you so much for joining. So District Attorney Alvin Bragg has now raised the prospect of a 4-year freeze on the case and Trump's sentencing. Are you surprised by that decision?
I think that 4-year freeze would be an injustice. You allow your jury to make its determination. You put that before a jury of Trump's peers or anyone's peers, and you need to have a conclusion. And injustice would be just to dismiss it outright without allowing the appeal process to go forward too, I believe. But kicking this proverbial can down the road for 4 years, that doesn't do right by anybody. It doesn't do right by the government, doesn't do right by the state, and doesn't do right by the criminal justice system.
So strong feelings there. I wonder if you're thinking about this. I wonder how likely it is that the judge will hold off sentencing. I know you say that it's not a good idea, but if Trump also is not sentenced, do you think his conviction will stand when it comes to maybe 4 years from now when it's taken back up?
Well, to clarify, I'm not saying holding off the sentence isn't a bad idea. There's an option of a stay, which is, as Brad said, is a non-dismissal options here. There's a stay. Let the appeal process go through its course. Let Trump file whatever he's going to file and continue to do so. So let's not conflate non-sentence with staying it and holding off and seeing how the case out in the appeals process. But ultimately, this is not going to resolve in a sentence of incarceration. This is not going to resolve in a sentence of probation or anything along those lines. I think ultimately the American people need closure, and that is a hard thing to judge and for a judge to make a decision about because it's such a unique case.
Yeah, and thank you for making that clarification there, because I know people sitting at home might not see that difference. And I want to ask you, a spokesman for Trump celebrated the delayed sentencing and called it a, quote, total and definitive victory for President Trump and the American people. Do you agree with that?
I wholly disagree with that. And one of the arguments that Donald Trump made is that you cannot sentence me because I have this absolute immunity as president. But keep in mind, this started prior to his presidency and to his election. But also that there's an argument that this will impact his ability to transition from Biden to Trump, which is quite a rich argument when you look at what occurred on January 6th, whether you believe he had a hand on it or not. But objectively look at the evidence that there is some relation to Trump's involvement or engagement, whether that's criminal or not. Jack Smith may never know. But it's a rich argument to me. This case has to come to a conclusion. That would be an injustice, and that's a wrong statement by Trump's team.
It's interesting when you say the case has to come to a conclusion. Based on DA Bragg's recommendation, does it sound like he or whoever the Manhattan DA is at the time will seek a sentencing once President-elect Trump is no longer in office?
Yeah, I think that would be a disappointing, to put it mildly, way to resolve this. And I used that term before, kicking that can down the road. It's used many times. It's not the answer for this. It leaves so much left unknown. And yes, you have a conviction, and ultimately, whatever a judge sentences is, but you can't wait for 4 years.